session absolutely will be able to help you. And one of the interesting things that we start to think about when we think about speaking, when we think about presenting, is that one of the top fears people tend to have is speaking publicly. Now, it doesn't matter, snake spiders, flying, dying, those are all up there in the top 10. But the number one fear for so many people is standing up and saying a few words. There's an old joke about Seinfeld who says, if you're at a funeral, statistically, you'd rather be in the casket than giving the eulogy. And I think this is probably very, very true for many of us. And of course, when you're speaking on camera, it's many, many times worse, because now not only can you see and hear and get some reactions from people, but you're getting real-time feedback on how you look, on how you sound. And it's a pretty uncomfortable experience for most people. So this is what I'd like to do. I'd like to consider over this session some key areas that we might want to use to improve, that we can get a better outcome. And I want to start with, what are some of the things about presenting that make it so difficult when we get into this process? What is it that puts people off? What have been some of the things that have gone wrong for you? So I want to start with this key question. What have been some of your nightmares? What have been some of the things that have happened for you when you've been presenting and you thought, oh man, that's bad? What are some of the things that you've seen? Now, it could be training, it could be a seminar, it could be a CIPD event when you can't find the microphones or you can't find the mute button. And what is it that you're doing that you find so very, very difficult? Thank you, Bobby. So what I want to do, please, starting with that as a question, what are the nightmares? What are the things you hope don't happen? What are the comments? What are the questions? What are the challenges? Find the chat button right now, please. It's along the bottom, and I'm going to give you 45 seconds. What I want to know is, what are some of the nightmares relating to presentation issues? Online, what are the difficulties? You have 45 seconds. Start typing right now, please. Okay, it's about 12, 15 seconds. Just go as fast as you can, please. These are good, these are good, these are good. Excellent stuff. Feels like you're going back to Death by PowerPoint. There's a good one. Yes, I like that one. Just give me a couple more, please, and we'll get straight into these. Couple of moments. Another 10, 15 seconds. Fast as you can, please, would be excellent. These are all good. These are all good. Zoom bombed. Ah, yes, yes. It's a thing, isn't it? That's nice meeting you. Check that you're muted. Okay, yeah, make sure we're muted. That'll be about good. Thank you so much. Right, let's see where we are. Now, I'm just going to scroll through a couple of these. And if I have muted you, please leave yourself muted for the moment. I'd really appreciate it. That would be great, because there's so many of us, it just causes that mad sound problem. Let's look through some of these. There was an awful lot of sound problems to start with, weren't there? So let's get into some of these key points. Technical difficulties, connectivity, the internet giving up halfway through. That, of course, is going to continue to be an issue until everybody decides that we're going to be doing this more. Are we all going to go back to offices? Are we all going to go back into work? Or is this the way it's going to be working from now on? Changing between screens is an interesting one. Noise issues, we've had a lot of that. Candidates disengaging. Now, here's the thing. One of the problems we often have as presenters is we look at our audience and we think, come on, what's the matter with you? Engage. Come on, I've asked you a question. And if you've ever done that thing when you've gone, so, are there any questions? And then there's that ringing silence. It's like when you do it live, but even worse online somehow, isn't it? Particularly if people don't have their cameras on, you don't see any faces, you just see a wall of names. It's a horrendous experience. So that disengagement thing is a real challenge. I'm going to show you a couple of specific engaging techniques you can use. Wi-Fi, technical difficulties, a lot of technical things there. Unmuted participants. Yep, I think we've lived and breathed that one together tonight. IT problems with signal, can't share screen. Knowing how to lead a Zoom or a Teams meeting. Lynn, it's a great point. One of the things I've found over the last year, having used both Teams and Zoom, is that actually, if we're going to have a meeting like this, I think Teams is great for a team of people that want to share some content. But if we're having a meeting like this, if we want some sense of engagement, discussion, I would risk breakout rooms. I'm not going to do it right now. But if we're going to do something like that, Zoom tends to be a much, much stronger platform. No feedback is coming back up again. Technology working correctly. People who don't want to be there is a fantastic one, Sarah. I love that issue. Going to come up with that in just a moment. Presenting and not being who we're able to speak to. Absolutely coming with that one in a moment, Sarah. Thank you. People not being engaged. Absolutely. That's an interesting one, isn't it? Let's challenge that right now. People not being engaged in what you're saying and being distracted elsewhere. Thanks, Rose. I appreciate that. Because here's the thing. You've opted in to be here this evening. It's 7:12 in the evening. You have chosen to be here, I assume. Thank you for that. But I have this view that people opt in to any meeting. I'll share that with you because that might sound incredible, but I think if we're going to run a meeting, if people are going to show up, if people are going to log in, we've got to work on the basis that we are working with them in order to make sure that this presentation works to the best of its possible ability. Engagement, inappropriate background's an interesting one, Laura. Love that one. We'll talk about that in just a moment. You have it that what you want to say in your head. When you want to say it, you try to, and when you try to, you fail big time, says Firefly. Thank you, Firefly. I think that's not your real name, but appreciate that. So I will come back to the rest of those in a moment. And what I want to say to you is, as we are working, please continue to type in your questions, your comments, your observations. In a normal, smaller group, I would ask you to put your questions through live as we work. But for now, I'm going to ask you just to type them into chat, and we'll deal with all of your questions, as many as we can, at the end of the session. So what are we going to be doing? I'm going to be sharing with you these 7 key aims in this session. How to set up your work environment. This absolutely helps you move away from some of those inappropriate backgrounds that you were talking about earlier on. Some key environments you can set. A lot of us don't think about this, but what could we do differently? Developing and maintaining engagement. That came up numerous times. Number 4, the single biggest thing you can do to maintain and develop your credibility online. Less engaged people, this is one of the key points. And then the last couple of points there, some simple structures you can use. And finally, some thoughts and ideas all on how do we develop and build and, I guess, set some new rules, some new etiquette. Because how do we want online meetings to go in the future? This isn't something many of us have ever really discussed. I'm going to suggest we start that conversation this evening. So this is the layout that I use for myself right now. Can I just move that over there? Good. So this is the layout that I use. And a lot of people like to see this because they like things like the information behind me. They like the fact that I seem to appear and disappear and shrink and grow and so on. So I use all of this content here and all this kit here. And the reason I use this is because I present a lot. And one of the things I like about this is that, unlike just a little talking head in the corner of a screen that you'll often get, I can talk about key bits of my content or kit. So if you can imagine having to explain a process or a system to your team, wouldn't it be so much more engaging if you could say, right, this thing here, and then we've got this point over here, and this could be a software flow. This could be a new process. This could be the 7 points of GDPR process that you'll want to introduce to your team. But instead of you sat in the corner, just talking quietly to yourself, you're now able to interact with all this content behind you. Now, this is a considerably more engaging way of working than what most of us do and what most of us say. And from my perspective, this is the way I'm normally working. So I'll have my laptop here, that's driving everything. You'll see I have a second camera. You see I've got my, my Instagram influencer light, so I can do my special poses like that. I've got my microphone, that's just here. So we've got a decent bit of sound. And the point of all of this is that what I want to be able to do is to make myself look as good as I possibly can on camera. Now, that's not a ridiculous thing to say. That's not a trite little comment. But I have 2 16-year-old sons. And one of the things I say to them a lot is, when you do stuff on the internet, it's there forever. Now, you know this, but so many of us are still logging in. And look, you've seen people do this at meetings, right? You've seen people log in like this, going, hello? Can you hear me? How can they not know? How can they not see themselves wedged down like that? You still see people log in like this. Is this the camera? Yes, that'll be the camera. You see, if we are going to be stronger, better presenters, we need to give some thought to how we look on the screen. And that's not a ridiculous throwaway comment. That's an important point, because part of the presentation, part of what we're doing is how good we look. It's all about what it is that we're doing and how we can best come across. Now, whether you like my shirt or hate my shirt, it's part of the presentation that I'm using. And let's also think in terms of the camera height and our relation to the camera and where the light is. If you're currently sat with a window behind you, at nighttime, not a major issue. But during the day, what you get is that, what's the, those shows they do, and they go, we've disguised the individual so you can't see their face. We're keeping them anonymous. You tend to look a little bit like that. So we want our light source in front of us. And ideally, we want the eye line to the camera either on a line or slightly higher. Now, the important reason that you get for this is that if I now talk to you, I can make eye contact with you. And when I work live, I work very, very hard to make eye contact. And I love talking to audiences of 200, 300, 400, 500. But the great opportunity we have online is we just need to talk to this one camera, and simultaneously we'll make eye contact with anybody who happens to glance at the screen. Of course, we understand that not everybody is looking at the screen at any point. However, we're working on the basis that at least some are. Now, if you've got your camera here and your monitor over here, this is what that looks like. It doesn't look so good. If you get confused about this, this is what it looks like when you look at the camera. This is what it looks like when you look at yourself. Lovely though you look, it's not as good as looking at the actual camera. So our first point here on these 7 points that I'm sharing with you over this session is let's start to look at our setup. You don't need the green screen, the microphone, the light, all of these things. They will help you. But let's at least start to think about the angle for the camera and the setup, because if we get that right, our presentation can be considerably stronger than otherwise. So let's start to move on from this, because if I set this up, I can now quite nicely have my meeting with you. And if I'm meeting a client for the first time, I've got to tell you, they love seeing their own logo behind me, because people always want to know how this is done. And it's very, very simple. You can do it on Teams, and it's even easier on Zoom. And it allows me to subtly point out that if I want to have a little way of advertising where you can find me, I can do that. And whether you like LinkedIn, or whether you like TikTok, or whether you like coming to me directly via email, there's a range of different ways I can do that. But whatever your nightmares, whatever the points you put in the content just then was, it's horrible seeing the inappropriate background. I agree. So maybe it's time to start exploring, can we have a good, strong background? Not just the Golden Gate Bridge or the one on the moon, which is hilarious, but half your leg disappears. Let's just set it all up so that we can have a good quality conversation like this. And isn't it great that I can move, because I can come right in and talk to you like this. I can take a step back. And listen, if you get nothing else from this session, honestly, I'll be slightly disappointed. But if you get nothing else from this session, why don't you consider standing up the next time you present? Because here's what everybody does. They open their laptop and they start presenting wherever they used to do work, which just looks a little bit rubbish, doesn't it? You know it. I don't want you to see my house. I'm quite happy for you to see where I'm working from here, because that works quite well. Here are 5 simple environments that will work for you when we are working with different types of audience in different situations. Now, these are different environments, and they will give you different feelings when you use them. So speaker-led content on the main screen and questions to delegates from the main screen, these are the 2 main ones that people will most often use. I'm using a balance of these 2 today. We're going to do some questions later on. But if you've ever sat through Zoom or Teams meeting after meeting after meeting after meeting after meeting, you might have got that sense of Groundhog Day where everything felt the same. And that's on you if you're the presenter of those meetings. Just as, by the way, the success or otherwise of this meeting is largely on me. I mean, it's difficult if we have the issue with the tech to start with, but we're through that now. We're past that. It's now down to me to set some different ways of being and thinking and feeling. And the questions that I'm going to encourage you to ask, or I'm encouraging you to ask via chat right now, feels very different from just passively listening to a speaker. So the way that I'm working with you now is different from if we're having a smaller meeting with perhaps 5, 10, 15 people, and we're all putting suggestions and ideas in. if you haven't used breakout rooms, they work in teams. They're very easy in Zoom. And one of the things about breakout rooms is they allow people to share those ideas before they come together. 3 weeks ago, I was working with a client who said they had a seminar they wanted me to do for them of 350 people. And they said the difficulty was they didn't have enough facilitators to put into all the breakout rooms. So why do we need facilitators for all the breakout rooms? I mean, we're working with adults, right? We're working with grown-ups, with people who've got jobs and mortgages and relationships and rents and liabilities. And they say, oh yeah, it's just, we want to keep a facilitator in each room to make sure they talk about the thing they're supposed to be talking about. And I always hate to break this to clients, but if we think like that, then people tend to behave in a certain way like that, and it just doesn't work as well as it might. So what I might want to consider, what you might wish to consider, is if we set up a breakout and we allow people to, even if they do spend a few minutes just talking with each other, that's generally okay. If ever I'm going to ask for a training group's input or a meeting's input, a breakout will always help. It allows people to build their confidence before they get started. The next one's really key to me. It's almost a key, I think, as standing up and presenting. Let me show you what I mean. See, what I've noticed is that we get into tech and we think tech is the answer to absolutely everything. Don't get me wrong, tech's brilliant. I'm a big fan of tech now. After 25 years, if you can't do what I do on live, I'm a big fan. Yeah, now we do it online. It's great. But let's think about a meeting that we might be running. And we're starting to think about how well our team's working. We're thinking about trust. And we're thinking of talking about Patrick Lencioni's 5 dysfunctions. Now, traditionally, what we might do is put the graphic up and talk through it. Or what we might do is to talk through it first and then put the graphic up and hope that some of it fits in. But there's something about using an actual whiteboard, because you can then start saying, oh, Dave, what do you think? And Dave will go, I think we have an issue with senior people because they don't listen. Imagine senior people not listening. So I go, okay, fine, thanks, Dave, that's a good point. What else? And somebody will go, well, I think that, the left hand and the right hand don't seem to know what they're doing. Okay, that's great. And what we actually start to do is we build up here some of the key points that you want to talk about as the delegates. Now, this absolutely works as a training session. It also absolutely works as a team meeting, as working together. But what we do first is we do that on a piece of paper or on a whiteboard. We start to get the conversation going. We use this as a brainstorm point. And then what we're able to do is very simply, we can move around and back and forth onto the next session. So I might say, yep, not a problem. And when we come back to this room, we've now got beautiful up graphic that we want to talk about. Now, for me, there's an elegance to this, which also includes and almost forces engagement. Because I didn't just show you this and say, do you recognize this? This is you guys. I first of all started with the whiteboard. And by starting with the whiteboard, we've got that point going. We've got people talking. We've got that engagement. Everybody can tell you what's wrong with your organization. Everybody can tell you what's wrong with you. Everybody can tell you what's wrong with management. So why don't we, if we're doing a session like that, invite that engagement, that discussion, get people talking right from the start. If we do that, we get a higher level of engagement immediately. The last point that I put on there was the point about working away from the meeting and feedback. And one of the things that I've noticed is a number of people are having phenomenally long online meetings, like all day online meetings. It's just beyond the wit of human. This is just a horrible thing to do. So I found, if you haven't experienced with this much, I found that a 2-hour session tends to be the outer limit for most people. I found in any single day, 2 90-minute slots tends to work. So if we're thinking about different feelings, if we're thinking about different environments, what we might do is to consider, right, let's do 90 minutes. Then I'm going to send you away to do something, to solve something, to fix something. And when you come back in an hour, 2 hours from the real world, you then input what you've learned, what you've discussed, what you've agreed into the second part of the meeting. Now, what you then end up with here is 5 very different feelings of your meeting, rather than the standard feeling, which nearly all of us go for, which is I'm going to sit in the corner and just talk about a bunch of slides. Yeah, because that's really engaging. You see, here's the problem. Back before the pandemic, there was a whole series of trainer or speaker or presenter who would stand there and show you 397 slides. Now, occasionally they do wacky, crazy stuff like say, right, let's go around the room and introduce ourselves, say who we are, where we're from, a bit about ourselves as a person, boyfriend, girlfriend, wife, husband. If you're married, hold up the pictures. Tell us a bit about yourself as a person. Tell us about your last 3 months. Tell us about your next 6 months. Tell us 3 things that are true and 1 thing that's false. Go! And it crept round like death around the meeting room. No one liked it. No one appreciated it. It felt awful. And by the time we got to the last guy, no one cared. Now, the problem is those same people are now doing that same thing online. And it was pretty bad live. It's even worse online. So we need to start shifting and moving and creating a whole new way of working. That's my argument for you. And these sessions here, or these experiences here, give you a different feeling. Whilst we're thinking about environments and whilst we're thinking about engagement, let's look at some different structures that you can use. Now, these won't suit all of you and they won't suit all of your audience, but at least 1 or 2 of them will suit you. And I will tell you, by the way, that all 5 of them are fantastic if you get the right audience and you can deliver them in the right way. So the first point is about proposal outline. So I was talking to a group last week and he said, well, you know, the thing is, Graham, it's all very well doing the whiteboard and the discussion and the this and the that and the other, but I do GDPR. I get 30 minutes. I've got to tell them about GDPR. So what I do is I put the slides on and I tell them about GDPR. Now I get that. But who said you had to explain everything? Who said you have to spoon feed your managers? Listen, if you work in HR, you know this. The big problem, the big difficulty that managers have sometimes is they don't like the actual managing part of their job. This is why they get HR in. You get HR in, they'll do the difficult conversations for you. They'll tell Bob from accounts that he's got an armpit problem. They'll talk to Julie from IT because she keeps turning up late. It's not her fault, really. And she goes to the toilet and cries a lot. And all of these things tend to get shifted onto HR. And one of the points I was saying to these guys was, listen, you don't need to explain all of the GDPR thing. What you do is you explain GDPR in 5 minutes in 3 slides. And then you send everybody to a breakout room. Because if you send everybody to a breakout room, you then instruct them to figure out how they will work with the new process. Because if we get them to work with this new process, which is what it's about, we're not discussing whether they do it. We're discussing how they instigate this in their process. Presenter-led pitch followed by questions. That's what we're doing this evening. Brainstorm, I just showed you that over there with the whiteboard. Allocated sections of meetings to different presenters. Now on paper, this should work. On paper, this should be engaging, right? Because there's 2 different voices or 3 different voices. The problem is, what if the person you're with is boring? What if the person you're with hasn't looked at the slides? What if the person you're with is the person who says, nah, I don't need to prepare for it. I'll just rock up and see how I get on. Well, 1, they don't ever rock up. They turn up looking a bit stressed and a bit late. And 2, it's always pretty catastrophic. Different presenters works, so long as we're all on board with the same thing. That last section there, online fast answers using text, I use that with you this evening. Just type in as quick as you can, get started. In larger groups, it works very well, but I've done it in groups of as small as 6. You've got 45 seconds, give me the solutions too. You've got 30 seconds, tell me what we should do about. And it's a really lovely way to drive engagement for those people that don't want to speak in a larger group. So we're just coming up to halfway through this session, and we're on this point 4 now, which is that single thing you can do to develop credibility online. And now I'm thinking about that. I'm going to run that a little bit later. In fact, I'm going to do 5, 6, and 7, and I'm going to come back to 4 because 4 is quite a tough one for most people. So I'm going to save that to the very end. Let's look at that point 5 there, dealing with less engaged people in the online meeting. Now, I don't know if you know this, but there are in fact 3 different types of people who show up at any meeting anywhere. I'm not saying there's only 3 types of people in the world, but I am saying there's 3 types of people who show up at meetings. You probably recognize all these 3 types yourself. Let me talk you through these 3, And then we'll talk about what you can do about them. So the first type is what I like to call the enthusiast. Good stuff. So that's the first type. The second one is what we call the holiday maker. The holiday maker is generally more of those around than the enthusiasts. Let me tell you about the third type, then I'll tell you about each of these. So the third type is what we call the prisoner. Some of you alluded to the prisoner in your opening text notes. So the enthusiast is the person who comes along to your meeting, and whether or not they want to be there. They're busy, right? You're busy, I'm busy, we're all busy. But they figure out I've got to be there. I'll get what I can from the meeting. They might ask questions, they might engage. They don't necessarily agree with everything you say. That doesn't mean they're an enthusiast, but they do engage, they challenge, they have questions, they want to know more. Then we have the holiday maker. Usually there are more holiday makers than anything else. Holiday makers are the people who are okay while they're quite enjoying it. They quite enjoy the discussion. If it's somewhere in a hotel pre-pandemic, they like the coffee and the biscuits. They quite like the opportunity to sit next to somebody they quite like. They like the opportunity to see you as a trainer or as a presenter or the head of HR bouncing around their viewing entertainment on the screen. And then we have the prisoner. And the prisoner is that one person in your meeting, could be a lot more than one, who with every nerve and fibre of their being lets you know that they don't want to be here. This is the person who, when you say, so what do you want to get out of this meeting? They will say, an early finish. The prisoner is the person who, when you go, all right, so let's do X, Y, and Z, they will go, oh. The prisoner is almost certainly going to want to have their camera off. Although I accept if you've got your camera off right now, that's okay. It's just how you feel more comfortable right now. Look, it's an evening session. You might be in your pajamas. I don't know. I don't care. It's your choice. But at work, the prisoner is the person who wants you to know that they're doing you a favor. And by the way, not only do they not like what you're saying, not only do they think this will never work because we tried this 3 years ago, I told them then and I'll tell them now it'll never work, because that's that person, that's the prisoner. The question is, what do you do about these people? Because most of us get drawn to either the enthusiast or the prisoner. And the enthusiasts are the people who are nodding and smiling. Oh. The enthusiast is the person who will ask the questions when we say, any questions? Or we'll get drawn to the prisoner. And the prisoner is the person who just glares at us. If they turn the camera on, they're like, so what do you think, Bob? Silence. Nothing. Bob's not going to answer for anybody. So what do we do about these people? How do we cope with them? Well, the good news is, if we do some of the things that I've been sharing with you this evening about the environments, about the engagements, if we do some of these key points here, you will dramatically see people moving up more towards holidaymakers and in some cases enthusiasts. We need online to encourage our audience to do a little bit more. And we, presenting online, need to present better. And I'm sharing with you these 7 key things you can do to present better. And that starts with how you look and how you present yourself. It starts with the rooms that you set up. It starts with the engagement techniques that you build in. And it absolutely starts with understanding that there are some people on this planet who light up the room the moment they walk out. There are some people that you work with who have a problem for every solution. Every function, every team, every department's got at least one person like that in the team. Statistically. And if, by the way, right now you're thinking there's nobody like that in my team, just think it through. All right, so let's move on to point 6 and point 7 there. So last couple of things. I will come back to point 4 in just a moment. This is a simple set of rules I tend to use for any time that I'm being asked to give a quick presentation on something. Now, you might know the work of Tony Buzan. And back in the 80s, Tony Buzan released a couple of books, Use Your Head and Use Your Memory. And what he argued was the start of the presentation and the end of the presentation were key points for retention and recall. And you know this is true, because anytime there's been a series of speakers, you feel a spike of interest each new speaker. You just do. The moment the person goes, listen, we're coming up to the last 5 minutes now, I'm going to pass on to, you go, oh, okay, God, that's nearly over. I mean, you may not say that, but that is kind of what you think. And then the next speaker turns up, you go, let's see where this is going to go. So if we can get a strong start and if we can get a strong finish, we're going to be quite a way ahead of where most people are. Now, most of us, when we think about starting, we just start. We don't really have a story to begin with. We don't have a question to begin with. We don't have something strong and powerful to start our session off. But we need to get that ready, because any opportunity that we have to present, I'm going to argue we ought to take. Any chance that we have to put an idea forward, any chance that we can do something, has got to be worth taking. So having a start and a finish, an intro and an outro, absolutely can save us, particularly when it feels like it's all going a bit wrong. Also, let's start to put stuff into threes. Now, you know that threes, there's a this and a this and a this. It kind of works for most of us. When we talk about location, and I forget the third one, but there's a point of three. You know, threes, fives, sevens, they work very, very well. Now, if you start to grip ideas into, here's my introduction, here's my positioning statement, here's my 1, my 2, and my 3, and here's my outro. Now, with that as a structure, it doesn't become all about the slides. It starts to become about what you're going to say, and you can focus on how you're going to perform, how you're going to present it. And I don't mean to over grandiose that. I'm not saying you have to act. I'm not saying you have to wave your arms around. That's just how I speak. But we do need to have that opportunity to think about and engage with and figure out the way that we are going to present ourselves. You are always going to need to introduce yourself. It's the old elevator pitch. More so than ever online. So why don't we have that ready to go when we need it? And this is about modularizing what we say. It's about those key introductions, those key stories, those key bits that we use so often, repeatedly. I have 2 last ideas for you. This point here, I think, is slightly contentious. And I'm going to ask you to consider this. And the conversation might continue this evening. The conversation might continue into the future. But what is the expectation we have for our attendees? Do we have rules for our attendees? Do we have expectations? Do we have etiquette? It's different if I'm working externally with a client because I'm just a hired help. I can't very well tell my client, for crying out loud, speak, will you? It's not a good way to go. But maybe I should be able to do that. Is it reasonable to expect people to have their cameras on in an internal meeting? I say yes. But when I ask people about it, they say things like, yeah, but you know, they're working from home. That's not reasonable. Well, I get that. But is that a short-term problem? Is that a medium-term problem? Do we need delegates to be able to have, or our colleagues to be able to have space where they can work, or at least have a blank wall behind them? Do we want people to use a green screen like I am right now? Is this an etiquette point? Because this has only been an issue for the last year or so. Previously to this, it was easy. Turn up at the meeting. Don't eat the smelly sandwich in the meeting room 5 minutes before we all go live. But now we've got this new set of rules we've got to consider. Sometimes I say to people, what's your problem with turning the camera on? They go, I can't turn the camera on. I'm in my pajamas. And I can't help but think, if I work with you, if we are in the same team, the same department, surely, and it's during work hours, surely I ought to be able to say to you, have a wash, put clothes on. I'm not suggesting that is what you would say, but I think this is a discussion we need to start to have. Is this etiquette? Is this a rule? Does this need to be mandated? Well, if it does, then senior people absolutely need to have their cameras on too, because we can't be making everybody put their cameras on if we don't. I'm still hearing, as you might be, you see this on LinkedIn all the time, people going to interviews and the panel doesn't have their cameras on. I don't understand how any of us can believe this is acceptable. And when people say to me, I feel a bit awkward seeing myself on the screen. There's a thing called Zoom face, apparently. It's a real thing. And I get that. But then there's a part of me wants to say, well, suck it up, buttercup, you're at work, turn your camera on. And I wonder, what is the discussion that we need to have about this? Now, I don't have a definite, on the other ones I can give you definite specific, this is what I think you should do. On these points, I'm fascinated to know what the discussion is going to be like over the coming weeks and months and years. And I wonder whether this is something that needs to become a change in the way we do work, in the way that we have meetings. And let me come back to that final point before we open the questions for everybody. And this is that point 4. And the question really is how seriously you want to improve as a presenter, as a speaker. Because I hear the same stuff. I have heard the same stuff for 25 years. People say to me, it's all right for you. That's what you're like. This is not what I'm like. This is a presenting version of me. So then they go, it's all right for you. You're naturally good at this. No, 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 no. I'm stood in front of a green screen with a whiteboard, a second camera, a main camera, a microphone, a giant light, 2 more lights, and speaking to this tiny little thing here. There is nothing remotely natural about any of this. It's a set of skills. It does take effort, and it takes an awareness of how you look and how you sound. So the final point I might make to you is this. If you want to be a better presenter, whether you are thinking about meetings and briefings, whether you're thinking about pitches, whether you're thinking about training, whether you're thinking about running something for the HR department, whether you're thinking of supporting your managers, whatever the situation, if you want to be a better trainer, better presenter, any current possible way of doing that, you have to put some effort in. And you also have to acknowledge a couple of things that are quite uncomfortable. First of all, it's not the content. The content might be dry, but I'm pretty sure I could deliver a GDPR session or a health and safety session and really engage my audience. So it's not the content. Some content's easier than others, of course, but it's not really the content. It's not really the audience. I've worked with some horrendously proper prisoners when they started the session, but that's just work. That's just what it is. A lot of people don't want to be there. Personally, I find it quite funny that people choose to behave like that. But that's not really the issue either. It's not the content. It's not the format. It's not the teams. It's the way that we present it. So my final urging to you, my final suggestion to you, my final plea to you is if you want to be a better presenter, if you want to be a stronger presenter, then what you've got to start to do is to figure that out for yourself and start to present stronger and better and with a greater degree of attention on how you look and how you sound. And that, I think, brings us beautifully to the 7:45 point, which is what I was aiming for. So I've talked you through 7 key points this evening. Sorry about the sound issues we had at the start of this evening. I hope we're through all of that now. But I've talked you through these 7 key points this evening. And all of these are pretty easy for any of us to think about and to work with if we choose to do this. Because everything here, or at least some of these things here, you can do. You can at least move your camera and alter the lights. You can think about the different environments. I shared 5 with you, they all work. Different engagement tools, absolutely. That developing credibility online, I've just shared that with you. You have to put the effort in. Less engaged people, well, to a degree, we've just got to work with them. That is what they are, but it's about not picking on them. That's kind of the worst thing you can do. The technique or the setup I've given you for the presentation itself is an easier one. And this final point about new rules for meetings, I think it's a conversation we all need to have. But what I want to do, I think I'm handing over currently to Stuart, or was it Liz, who's going to handle some of the questions. So I'd be delighted to hear any of your questions right now. We have a bit of time to run through those. So who wants to start us off? Liz, am I handing over to you, or Stuart, am I handing over to you?
I'm here. What we'd like to do, maybe we need some more questions. There's a few questions been coming in through the chat box, but a couple of them have been handed. One of the questions that came in was very much about green screens. Would you be able to give us an idea of some of the kit? Because I've seen some very, very different prices. And one of the questions or the confusions about green screen is I've seen elements where online, it's just been a green sheet, but it's been okay. It was about wrinkled. What are your guides or advice around that?
Okay.
Sorry, just before you jump on, anyone else who's got questions, please throw them into the chat box so Graham can answer them.
I can currently see 51 new messages and counting, so I will do my very, very best. All right. So when I started with all of this just last summer on the tech, I started with this screen, which came with a frame to hold it up, and it came with 2 side lights, and it came with a very small ring light. The ring light isn't actually in this picture here because I've since replaced it with that giant one you can see. So I bought the frame, the 2 small lights, the ring lights, and a bunch of other little things, you know, those umbrellas you get for lights. The whole lot was about £100. Now, I think the current set on Amazon, I just went on Amazon, is about 120 to 150 pounds. My advice to you would be this: don't go out and buy all the best kit, because you don't know if you need it yet. You don't know if you're going to get into it yet. I would buy the cheap stuff and learn to use it. And then you're going to realize after a bit that actually the light's not quite good. And you'll get a giant ring light like this. And the day you switch it on, let me show you what happens when I switch it off. Okay, so that's not so good, right? So you'll suddenly realize how rubbish it is without that. And if I change that to the room lighting, it's just horrendous. It's a horror, yellowy, broken up light. So you'll start to add decent lighting, and then you'll figure, well, actually, what I want to be able to do is to have a second camera. Because if I have a second camera, I don't need to keep moving my computer around. So you put your second camera in, and that's brilliant, but then you realize that that's got a separate microphone over there. So you buy a giant microphone like this one, which allows you to have better sound. And as you go on with this, you spend more and more time and more effort making everything work a little bit clearer and a little bit better. And you can see all the kit that I've got in this picture here. The laptop is currently on this microphone stand. Well, originally it was on an old desk with about 300 CDs to get it to the right height, because I wanted that Instagram influencer look, and so on. So the answer is, you start, in my opinion, cheap. You buy what you need, you learn how to use it, and then you buy a bit more kit and a bit more kit, and you gradually improve it as you go.
Graham, hi, it's Liz here. We've had a question from Liam Wood. He'd like to know what software you're using to zoom around with.
Yes, well, between the two cameras, right? So the big secret is that's just on Zoom. So last summer, what Zoom did was they allowed you to have a second or a third camera in. So in order to get a great deal more movement in the presentation, which is so key, the first thing I did was I stood up. Now, this was a game changer for people. I'm still selling to people, if you stand up when you present, it's better. Then when you plug a second camera in, you can buy these cameras for 30, 35 pounds from Amazon. The software, all you have to do is you literally tap a couple of keys and it'll bring the second camera in, or the third camera. You can have a huge number of cameras. Zoom will allow you to connect to your phone. So if I wanted to, I could put my phone on the side of the room, tune that into this same room, and then when I flick to it, it will then start beaming through the camera and beam it to everybody. So even with the native stuff on Zoom, you can do all of these really smart moves.
Great. And can you use that on Teams as well?
Now, you see, Teams is a problem because Teams was never set up to do all of this. I know I sound like I'm getting shares from Zoom. I'm really not. But I've used both Teams and Zoom throughout the summer and into this year, and Zoom consistently outperforms Teams. Zoom had breakout rooms a year ago. Teams has only just got them, and it's still a bit crunchy. People that are using Teams a lot now saying it's a lot better. When I first started using Zoom a year ago, one of the things that I was doing was using the virtual background to have slides behind me. And I was literally going into the menu, changing the background, and then moving it manually that way. It was very slow and very crunchy, but it worked. And they've just introduced this new piece of software that allows us just to change slides in the normal way that we would do, whether we're in front of it or whether we're behind it with the green screen. But the effect that this gives, I think, is really powerful.
A couple more coming in as well. How do you make yourself bigger and smaller on the screen?
Okay, again, I'd love to tell you it's amazing tech, but all it is what we can do on this particular feature. So if you're on Zoom, down the center, you won't be able to do it right now because this isn't your meeting. There's a share screen button. You hit the share screen button, along the top, it will say basic and then it'll say advanced. If you hit advanced, you'll then see a beta version, which says slides as green screen. It is as simple as that. It's a fantastic technique. It's so powerful.
Okay. There's a one from Lisa. Why do you use as green screen and not just a blank wall?
Okay, so you can use just a blank wall. You tend to get a nicer impression if you use the green screen. What you're looking to remember is most of your favorite Hollywood movies use sound studios, and these are largely giant warehouses covered in green screen, and it allows them to be in the middle of the sea or doing some Matrix type nonsense. I'm sorry if that ruins it for you, by the way, if you're a Pirates of the Caribbean fan. They're not really doing all of it. Some of it's green screen. So that's all we're doing. And what you get with a proper green screen is you can light the green screen here, and I can light myself. So now I get a really strong, clear image, rather than, you know, that flickering thing. You know, sometimes you've logged into a meeting and you're sort of saying, well, that's not quite working, and I don't quite know why. And that's why. It's because you get that kind of weird echoey reflection thing. So green screen just makes it visible.
There's a question from Lynn. I'm just trying to do it. I think it's, what's your definition of a room? Because is the actual meeting in Zoom a room, or is it about breakout rooms? Is it about different elements?
Great question. Thank you. And I'm sorry I wasn't clear the first time round. So this is our room that we're meeting in. We have breakout rooms. And what I was arguing there is that too many meetings just feel the same. They feel like the same environment. And actually, all we need to do is just actively and specifically choose, right, am I going to be running this? Am I going to be taking questions? Am I going to put you into breakouts? Breakouts on Zoom is the easiest thing in the world. You punch a button and how many people? 60. How many rooms? I want 5 per room. Bring, organize, and they all just go out to the rooms. For anybody that's ever been trekking around a hotel in Milton Sodding Keynes trying to find their missing delegates, now you punch a couple, with apologies if you're from Milton Keynes, you punch a couple of buttons and and they're there. And you punch a button again and they all come back. It's amazing. That's what I mean by rooms.
Okay, Lisa, another one from Lisa. What camera are you using? You have it in a tripod. I use a laptop one at the moment. What are your thoughts around that?
So the laptop ones, depending on the laptop you've got, will be very, very good to very, very awful. The first laptop I was using when I was doing this, I thought, well, all cameras are the same. I'll just use a cheap laptop for this. It turned out all cameras weren't the same. This is the standard camera that I'm using right now inside the Mac. This camera over here is I think it was 30 quid, 32 quid from Amazon. I've just literally swapped that one because the one I was using before, which was 45 quid from Amazon, for some bizarre reason was having trouble focusing and holding focus. So I'm flipping between that one there, which is a 30 quid one, and this one here, which is the standard one inside the Mac. And that's literally a couple of buttons, as you can see.
Okay, there's been a couple of questions that have come through as well about room size. So one from our wonderful Helen Worthy. Hiya, Helen. What would be your top recommendation for equipment in a small room? And there was a previous question that I'd like to link it to about using the whiteboard, and apparently, you know, where people are in a very confined space, is there a way that you've got to work around it?
So is there a way I went around it? Sorry, I'm slightly confused in terms of...
So there's two questions, one about size of room,
yeah,
but there is another question that came slightly earlier about using a whiteboard, where you were showing the whiteboard and you were demonstrating the whiteboard, actually people being able to have that amount of space to use one.
Okay, so you can't see me so well now, although I might be able to help you with that a little bit as well. There we go, a little bit of lights, good stuff. So this is the room, right? My office is over here, and it's one wall that I'm using. I think you can hear me okay now, yeah? So it's just one wall that I'm using, and the whiteboard is there tucked into the corner, and next to it is where I've been presenting, and next to that is the ring light. So, and there's my samurai suit of armor. So all of that is against one wall. So it's quite a small space that I'm using. Now, if you don't have all of that space, maybe you can't do the whiteboard, but it is as simple and as easy as that. There's not a huge amount that you're using. My whiteboard here, so there it is. Yeah, you can see that. So I can flip. If I can flip between the two, I've got what, a meter from here to the wall. That's about it.
Okay. He says,
losing. Sorry, jumping in. We'd like to know, can you put a timer on Teams, on breakout rooms, sorry, so that they can come back into the room once you've set the specific time limit has gone?
Now, I don't know about Teams, because when I was using Teams a lot last year, it it was horribly painful, and we had all sorts of issues with things crashing out and going wrong. So what I'm now doing, because I do everything on Zoom, you can time. So you can say you've got a 5-minute timer, and it will automatically bring people back. You're able to broadcast to everybody in the breakout rooms and go, you've got 5 minutes left. You can pop into the breakout rooms, go, hi, how you doing? Are you messing about? And you can message everybody as well. They can also message you. So of all the sessions I've been doing this year, just since the start of this year, I've had everybody in a variety of different rooms, and then I can broadcast them all at the same time. I can call them back at the same time. I can also move them around. So if you decide you want to move things, it's a simple button, recreate, and it sets everything up again from scratch.
I think there's 2 questions that are very similar from Sue and Lauren, which is about, can you see chat as well as slides on your laptops, or do you need a separate laptop to log on as a delegate? And a linked one with that, do you keep the notes on your screen, or do you rehearse a script using prompts for your presentation?
So I've only started using slides for the last year, because it turns out that much as I don't like slides, they're quite helpful online. So what I do, because I do a lot of presentations, I'll do 2, 3, or 4 a day. The session I've just done with you was driven by that. That was it. This is an A5 notebook. And all I've got down there is numbers 1 to 12 for my slides. So that will literally have the intro line or the crossover point that I'm going to I have WB for whiteboard or second camera or breakout. So I have a variety of codes that I use for myself. In terms of can I see the chat on the screen? Yes, I can do. In a group this size, as I say, I tend to ask somebody else to manage that for me, because otherwise I'm constantly scrolling and trying to find all of that. But that's the way I would do that in a group this size. In a group of 10, 15, 20 people, yep, I can see that. I've got the chat window open right now. I've got the window for all of you open right now. So I can see 25 people on my room, and there are 3 screens of that, but only the first half of this room have got your camera on. Thank you for having your camera on. So yeah, that's the way I'm working that right now.
Okay. We've not any more questions from anybody. I'm going to ask directly, what are your 3 biggest don't do's when presenting virtually? I'll accept 1 or 2.
You'll accept what you're given, right? So okay, the three biggest don't do's when you're presenting online. All right, fine. The first thing is this, and this isn't just online, worse online. People have a habit. Many people have a habit of spoon feeding everything to their audience, and we don't actually need to do that. Our audience can work some stuff out themselves. Now, in an event like this, we have 45 minutes. So I'm going to give you what I can in 45 minutes, but I do want your questions at the end. But my biggest don't is that spoon feeding thing. We tend to, and here's a slide, and here's a slide, and here's a slide. I'm going to share this, I'm going to share this. Actually, let's get some questions and get some challenges. I think the second one is this, biggest don't. I think the biggest don't is going to be something along the lines of questions. I don't generally like questions at the end. So I generally will always have questions throughout. And the reason is this. You're listening to a presentation, you're engaged, you're switched on, you're enjoying it. You're thinking, this guy's good. I wonder if we should hire him. Yes, you probably should. And you're thinking, I like all this. I'm going to ask a question. And you go, excuse me, I've got a question. And the trainer goes, or the speaker goes, sorry, would you mind just waiting till the end? And the moment passes, and it's a really bad thing. The number one thing everybody in this room wants is better engagement. Of course you do. When you want engagement, you've got to get questions. Well, you get more questions by asking more questions and getting that going back as a bit of a feedback loop. So I think that is my second, which is probably where I'm going to stop for the moment, is my second big don't do. I want questions. I want discussion. I want that working all the way through. It's a much more powerful way of working. I
am very aware we're at the 8 o'clock. There was one other question. I'm trying to find who it was from.
You can have as many questions as you like. I see this as a little bit of balancing out the slightly messy start, which I'm still irritated about. I couldn't find the mute button quick enough.
Apologies for whomever it was.
I know who it was.
What's your advice for dealing with prisoners?
Okay. So here's the thing. If you call somebody out, it's the worst thing you can do. So let's say we've got Bob sat here, and let's say we've got a room full of people, their cameras on, and they're all kind of, oh, yeah, great. And I noticed that Bob's kind of doing this. He appears to be staring at his crotch, but I assume what he's actually doing is texting somebody more interesting than me. And I kind of get that's going to happen. The problem is if I go, Bob, what do you think? Or Bob, you seem quite quiet. Do you want to get a bit more involved? You know, you get a lot more out of it if you put a bit more into it. Remember, the only stupid question is the question you don't ask. Now, if I do any of that nonsense, what's going to happen now is it's me against Bob. Bob's going to win because there's more of you than me. And we tend to focus on the prisoners, or we tend to focus on the enthusiasts. What we've got to actually do is to assume that everybody wants to be here, because the slightly uncomfortable truth for everybody here right now is this: you have opted in. So if you're ever sat in a meeting thinking, God, this is dull, well, you're still there. You've opted in. So you can either be a little bit more adult about it and engage and do the best you can, or you can sit there and let the person know that you think it's rubbish. But what you need to know is that when you've been doing this for a long while, I'm not sat here thinking, oh no, Bob thinks I'm rubbish. I'm sat here slightly thinking, look at Bob, oh dear. So part of what I would suggest you do to handle the prisoner is understand that story I've just explained to you. And if you really want to go hardcore, you tell that story at the start of your session. Because once you've told the story and we've all had a laugh about prisoners, it's really tough to be a prisoner, because I've just told the story about prisoners. So if you're sat there giving it all that, you look like a bit of a lemon. But hey, fill your boots.
Super. So we are just over that couple of minutes over. Some fantastic feedback. There was a question about getting the slides. Would you like to tell them about how you're going to share the video, hopefully with some of the muted sound as well?
I'm hopefully going to cut the beginning of the start off. It was horrendous, wasn't it? God, that was painful. I couldn't think what I was doing or anything. Right. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put that onto YouTube. I will make that link available. Perhaps if I send that to you, Stuart, you can send that on. I'm also a big fan of both LinkedIn and TikTok. Now, before you judge me for being a big fan of TikTok, I started using TikTok in June last year because all of my audience is B2B, right? And I've built it all on LinkedIn, and we're doing pretty well